Good morning, folks. David is my name. I'm going to be your host today. And today we're going to talk about design controls and using Qualio's design controls with a third-party application, specifically Jira. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. If we don't have enough time at the end of today's session to go through the questions, I'll follow up with everyone directly. Before we begin talking about design controls, I just want to do a little intro to the Qualio application for those of you that are new. And this is Qualio, your cloud-based quality management system. As it's cloud-based, you won't need to download or install anything. Once you have accepted your invitation to your company's Qualio account and completed the setup of your user profile, all you need to do is open your preferred browser, navigate to app.qualio.com and log in. Once you log in, you will land on your personalized dashboard. From there, you can navigate through to the rest of the application. And this is my dashboard. At the top of the screen, we can see the navigation bar. And there we can see the core features and tools that build on those core features. The first thing I have highlighted is documents and training, and they are the core features. On top of that, we have events, suppliers, and design controls, and they are tools that will support certain pre- and post-market activities. It's worth noting that from a product development point of view, from a product development point of view, some of the work required will be done in Qualio documents in the workspace, and some of the work will be done in design controls. So it will be both features that will support your product development process, and I'll go through those different workflows here today. Now, when it comes to support, if you ever have any questions, you can always send us a message directly through the application itself. When you go to send us a message, you'll be presented with a number of options. And the first option is for access. And that is because for new users, design controls and events are disabled by default. Access can be requested on a user-by-user basis or on a company-wide basis through the in-app chat. So you can request access. If you don't see design controls in your account today, you can request access through the in-app chat. The other options we have available are for advice. So if you have a question, how do I review a document? Anything like that, you can select I need advice. If you find something to be not working, perhaps a bug or a software defect, you can report that with this option here, something is not working. And then the next option I want to draw to your attention is this suggest enhancements option. When you suggest enhancements through this channel, your feedback will go direct to the product manager in charge of the feature or product that you are providing feedback for. Now, the product team do not respond to these directly, and indeed they review feedback on a quarterly basis. So we may not be able to give you an immediate response to your question, but the feedback will go direct to the product team. In the meantime, the support team will be able to review the feedback that's been provided. And if they determine that it is in fact a bug or perhaps something that they can advise on, they will either relay it as a bug for the engineering team, or they'll send you the relevant help center material to help keep you moving forward. So that's support. You can send questions to myself and other Qualio experts directly in the application itself. And one thing before I finish up here, when you select advice, something is not working, or suggest enhancements, there will be a couple of qualification steps. And that's simply to identify what area of the application you're referring to. So if you're providing feedback or reporting a bug or asking a question, the bot will ask if it's related to documents, training, events, or so on. And then after that, you'll be asked to provide the report or the feedback, and then you'll be asked for a screenshot. Once those pathways have been completed, then you'll be routed to an agent. Last thing I'll say then, we have agents spread across North America and Europe, and with that, we can provide most users with a near 24-hour support window. Last thing then, in terms of responses, we get a response out in under 30 minutes. That's the initial response, but we aim to have these queries closed in a 24 to 48 hour window. Okay, so that's support. Let's talk about today's agenda. So first, we'll take a look at the key stakeholders in the overall product development process. And then we're going to take a look at creating requirements, things like user need and design input. We'll do that in Jira. We'll assess them for risk. We'll do that in Qualio. And then we'll review and approve those requirements and risks, and we'll do that in Qualio as well. But first, let's talk a little bit about the standards and regulations for design controls. The FDA states that manufacturers shall establish and maintain procedures to control the design of the device in order to ensure that specific design requirements are met. In the ISO standard 13485, clause 7.1, product realization, this prioritizes establishing processes and techniques to design and develop medical devices with a focus on risk management. And then the IEC standard 62304 is a functional. This standard does not prescribe a specific life cycle or development model. The users of this standard are responsible for selecting a life cycle model that the software project and for mapping the processes, activities, and tasks in this standard onto that model. Okay, so next let's talk about the challenges that we have identified across our user base. The first one is that there are different teams working in different systems, and those systems do not communicate. And these silos hinder speed and collaboration. And subsequently, end-to-end traceability is burdensome. Tracing all of the objects that have been generated across the different systems can be quite burdensome. And finally, creating those output artifacts can be painfully time-consuming. So this is an illustration of the problem that we're trying to solve for. Disparate systems, teams working in silos, and people having to bring everything together from different places manually. So what we hope to achieve with this feature is to unite all of your data in one place for traceability and approval. In short, we'll unite your systems and data to enable effective and timely collaboration, identify gaps proactively so you can take immediate action, and generate release documentation with ease. In terms of integrations available, today we have 2 integrations available for systems used to develop product requirements. And they are for Jira and Azure DevOps. Today, we will be focusing on Jira, but we do have an integration available for Azure DevOps as well. So if you and your teams are working with DevOps, we have an integration available for you as well. In terms of testing then, we have integrations available for X-Ray and test rails. So if you have teams working in those systems, they can continue to work in those systems where they are successful, and the work they produce in those systems will be reviewed and approved in Qualio. Okay, so let's develop a product. Let's develop a conceptual product, a CardioSync app, a software device. To get started, let's take a look at all parties involved in this workflow. So in this conceptual product development, we have an engineer involved, a product manager, and a quality manager. The engineer will likely be doing most of their work in Jira. There they'll define the different design elements, establish traceability in creating the product. The product manager will likely work in Qualio documents, preparing the things like your design and development plan, risk management plan, and indeed working with the quality manager, who will be working in both Qualio docs and in design controls, managing final approvals and the compliance documentation. Now, to begin, the first thing you need to look at are your procedures and policies. Your procedures and policies need to be established in order to start the design process in a compliant manner. Some examples, some documentation examples include your document control SOP, your supplier management SOP, or your risk management SOP. It's common for organizations to develop a device before establishing procedures, but that can lead to issues like missed compliance step in device development, ineffective procedures because they've been written out of context, disorganization and resources spent on retrospective cleanups, and all of which can lead to difficult or messy audits. Some examples: document control, design control, electronic records and signatures. From the design and development planning point of view, the FDA and ISO require defined planning documentation, and the format is unspecified. Many organizations will create a design and development plan with phases or stages, and those phases are generally broken down relative to the device's complexity. At each stage, risk is assessed, and depending on device classification or complexity, design reviews are conducted. So there are several ways to plan or several methodologies to follow. Each offer a series of gate stages or phases. At the end of each phase, you'll have a checklist to run through to review what you've set out to do and what you've completed. The standard does not prescribe a specific lifecycle model. The users are responsible for selecting a lifecycle model for the software project that maps the relevant processes and activities to the relevant standard. Okay, so let's take a look at an example design and development plan document. So we've seen some example procedures. Now we're going to take a look at an example design and development plan. So this is a Qualio document. On the Qualio document side, it's been produced manually outside of design controls. The template we have here is just an example. It's not set in stone. If anyone would like a copy of that template, I'm more than happy to share that with yourselves. Please feel free to reach out in the in-app chat to let us know, and I'll do what I can to get that into your Sandbox account. If you don't have a Sandbox account, let us know and we'll work to get that set up. They're available at no extra cost. Oh, there's a question there. Do you have plans on supporting an integration with Visual Studio? I'm not sure what type of system that is. I've not come across it myself, but we are open to integrating with new systems. We have a development team dedicated to API and integrations, so I can absolutely record your query as feedback or as a feature request for the team to consider Visual Studio for integration development. So I just want to play that one more time. I just want to highlight one thing. So with this design and development plan, in the project phases section, we have the different phases defined. And within each phase, we have the deliverables defined as well. So as you are going through the design review at the end of each phase, you will use this plan as your sort of checklist. Your plan will define what it is you will achieve through each phase. And at the end of each phase, you can come back and update this document with a link to the deliverable in Qualio. Okay, so here's an illustration of this product's development. There are 4 stages. We're going to initiate the first stage, and at the end of that stage, we are going to conduct a design review. For this product, we're not going to conduct a design review at the end of phase 2 or 3. We're going to do the final design review at the end of phase 4. Sorry, there are a couple of other questions coming in there. Okay, yeah, a couple of people want those templates. That's no problem. Let me just take a screenshot of who has asked, and I'll follow up with everyone later in the week. Okay, so let me just move those, and I'll move on to, we're going to begin phase 1. Project definition and planning. Okay, so some key actions in this phase. Some key actions in this phase include generating your epics, your stories, or what might be your level 1 or level 2 product requirements. Your preliminary risk analysis, your risk management plan, FMEA. What's highlighted in blue are the items that I'm going to illustrate today. The first 2 rows will be produced in Jira, and then we'll go back into Qualio to assess those requirements for risk. Sorry, someone else wants a copy. I'm just going to take a screenshot of that. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll move on. Some other key activities for phase one, design review. Obviously, this is another item that I will highlight, and then as well, producing like your PRS and your SRS, and that will be done in Qualio documents. Okay, so next slide, we'll have a video clip of working in Jira. Okay, so to preface this, the Jira project has been set up, and on the Qualio side, a product has been set up in Design Controls. The product in Design Controls and the Jira project have been integrated. And with that integration, every 5 minutes, Qualio pulls data from Jira. So again, that allows your engineering team to continue to work where they are successful. And then as they produce more and more work, all of that work will be pulled into Qualio where it can be routed for approval. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create an issue in this Jira project, and this is going to be for my level 1 requirement. Now, the type of issue that I'm about to use is labeled user need, but the label on the issue type is open in that it can be anything. Like it can be epic, which is the default in Jira. It could be user need, whatever you prefer or require. So that's my first level 1 requirement created. Now I'm illustrating the status that you can change, and the status in Jira will be pulled into Qualio. So that will help you determine where the developer sits with that requirement. So now we're back in Qualio. We're on the product dashboard, and it's on the product dashboard where you are notified about new design elements or changed design elements, and we can see that here. Over here in the right-hand column, there is a status for new or changed. So the other requirements are requirements that were already approved. They have since been changed, and that change has been flagged here in Qualio. And what's happening on this dashboard is we're getting prompted to initiate a review and an approval of these design elements. But for today, we're going to focus on everything that is new. This field here is where we will pull the Jira issue status. So as your engineers are working in Jira, if they add a requirement, within 5 minutes, it'll be pulled into Qualio. In that amount of time, they might not have completed the work required, so they can use this status that is pulled in from Jira to inform whoever it is that is on the Qualio side, that is managing the Qualio side. This status can inform them where that engineer is at with the work required. So now I've gone back to Jira. I'm now going to create a level 2 requirement, which is the issue type user story. Again, the type of issue you use isn't set in stone. It can be any type of issue, and the label used can be anything. It's totally up to yourself. Now, what I'm about to do next, once I've inputted the requirement itself, I'm going to link this level 2 requirement back to the level 1 requirement that I created earlier. And to do that, I'm going to use the relates to option in Jira. So when you're linking an issue, we'll always use the option relates to, and then in the next field, we'll select the issue that we are linking back to. I've selected create another issue at the bottom. Let me just move this, does that. So at the very bottom just here, I've selected create another issue because I'm actually going to create a series of level 2 requirements, but it'll be kind of done a bit faster in the video. Once all of the requirements have been inputted into Jira, I'm going to go back to Qualio. I'm on my product dashboard, and I'm going to rearrange everything so that all of my new objects are listed at the top. So this way, I'm going to focus just on what we have created here today. And we can see a couple of them have come through already. We can see the level 1 requirement. We can see 2 of the level 2 requirements. There's a third one that is pending. And now on the requirements tab, regardless of where your requirements are sourced from, if they come from Jira, Azure DevOps, or if you are inputting requirements directly in Qualio, this is the format that they will display in the application. And by default, all of your level 1, your top level requirements will display. But you can expand each one to find the subordinate requirements, which we'll see now. So I'll expand the one we created there. And here we can see the 3 level 2 requirements that I created in Jira. So now all 3 have been pulled across to Qualio. Additionally, this view more button alongside each requirement will bring you to the source of that requirement. So in this case, it'll bring us to Jira, but if you're using Azure DevOps, it'll bring you direct into Jira. Of course, there will be login credentials provided. So if you're not already logged into Jira or DevOps, then you will need to log in after you click that button. Okay, so that brings me on to my next slide. Okay, so we have just inputted a series of requirements there. The next thing to do is to assess them for risk. So I just want to talk a little bit about the standards and regulations for risk. Let me just move those. So the FDA states that manufacturers shall establish and maintain procedures to control the design of the device in order to ensure that specific design requirements are met. In the ISO standard 13485, oh, sorry, I said that one already. So for the ISO standard 14971, the aim of this standard is to help manufacturers identify, estimate, and evaluate, monitor, and control risk associated with the medical device. It also helps minimize risk by giving guidance on how to check whether the control measures in place were implemented correctly. So the ISO standard is focused more on potential harm to the patient. And then the IEC standard 60812, this explains how failure modes and effect analysis, including the failure mode effect and criticality analysis variant, is planned, performed, documented, and maintained. The purpose of your FMEA is to establish how processes might fail to perform their function so that any required treatments could be identified. So your ISO standard is more about potential harm to the patient, whereas FMEA is more related to ways a device or process can fail. The risk analysis based on the ISO standard is required, and FMEA is optional. So these are just some examples of ISO versus IEC risks. Okay, so now we're going to go back into Qualio and we're going to assess the requirements that we've just added for risk. So I'm on my product dashboard. First, I'm in Design Controls. I'm on my product dashboard. And now I'm going to navigate to the risk section to initiate a risk assessment. Now, every assessment form begins with 2 sections, general and initial assessment. In the general section, you can summarize the potential harm or failure mode in the title section. You can identify a requirement as a source of risk, and then you can specify where in the risk assessment process this risk sits. And you can identify multiple requirements as a source of risk. Okay, so now we'll move on to the initial assessment section. And for your hazard analysis based on the ISO standard, this is where you'll document the potential hazardous situation, and the potential harm to the patient. Once you've documented those pieces, you'll move on to determine the probability and severity of these potential harms. You will input a probability measure of improbable, remote, occasional, probable, or frequent. This is a default scale. You can customize the scale, you can customize the labels you see here. And you have an option for a 5-point scale or a 3-point scale, and the same can be said for severity. Now, your inputs for probability and severity will result in an initial risk level. As well as customizing the probability and severity scale, you can define or customize your own risk levels as well. By default, we offer low, medium, and high, but you can add a no risk level if you wish, or you could reduce it down to 2 risk levels. Maybe you manage risk in a way that you just have acceptable or unacceptable risks. So you can configure this in a way, so instead of low, medium, and high, your options are just acceptable or not acceptable. Now, in this case, we've input a probability of remote and a severity of major, and that has resulted in a risk level, an initial risk level of medium. The way this is configured, this risk level requires mitigation. So we now have additional fields for risk control and final assessment, which we'll see now in a moment. If your initial risk level results in a level that does not require mitigation, the fields for risk control and final assessment will not appear. So in the risk control section, we have a mitigation field to put in a statement to summarize the control measures that we have in place. And then in the associated documents field, we can point to or reference perhaps a design input, or indeed a verification test to support the measures or stand up the measures that we have in place. So that allows you to put in some brief detail in this free text field, but then the majority of the detail will be in the requirement itself. Now that we have mitigated against the risk identified, we can now perform the final assessment to determine what the residual risk level is. So now our risk has been added. This has been assigned the status of new. So this design element will also list on the product dashboard where it is prompting the quality manager or whoever is managing Qualio to route this for approval. So now I'm on my product dashboard and I've generated a preview of the design element that I've just selected. So on my dashboard under changes awaiting review, I clicked on the row with the risk we just created, and now a preview has appeared. With this preview, I get a bird's eye view of everything related to this design element. In this case, it's a risk, so we can see all of the required information, hazardous situation, harm, relevant dates, related design elements, and the review history. This is blank right now, but once we begin to review this, we'll see this field populate. but I need to go back and update this risk. I've actually identified the mitigation as a source, so I'm just going to go back. I'm going to update it to remove the mitigation from the source field. So now when I preview that risk in the related field, all I see is the individual source and individual mitigation. Okay, so that's risk. I'll move on to my next slide. Okay, so now we're at the end of this phase one, and we are going to initiate a design review. To do that, we're going to create a Qualio document. So on the document side, we're going to use a template called Design Review Record. This is another example. If anyone would like a copy, I'm more than happy to share this with you guys. It's not offered as the exact way you must do things. These are absolutely open to interpretation and may need to be amended to suit your own business. But if anyone would like a sample copy, I'm more than happy to share that with yourselves. So we're going to initiate our design review in the Qualio document. This is where we'll document any actions or changes. And then if there are any changes required, in the change control section of this document, that's where you can perform your impact assessment. So now we're going to create a review. We've initiated our design review formally with a Qualio document. Now back in design controls, we're going to initiate what we call a review just to gather all of the design elements that we've added and route them collectively for approval. So here we are back on the product dashboard. All of these items listed are listed under changes awaiting review. And what's happening is we're getting prompted to initiate what we call a review, and we'll use this review form to capture or gather everything under one form and route everything for approval. Now, there's a number of items here, not just the items that I've created today. Some other colleagues are working in that account. So when I go to create this review, everything that's under this list will automatically populate the form that I'm about to create, but we can remove any items that are not ready for approval. So this is the review form. Every review is assigned a unique ID using the prefix DCC. In the description field, we can put in a brief description of what's been added, what's been changed, or indeed if we're going through like a phase one review. And then under design elements under review, this is where all of the requirements and risks will be listed that will be routed for approval. But as you can see, it's more than just what we've created. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to remove the items that we don't want to approve right now. Okay, so that's everything I've created. Now I'm going to move on to my approvers field. This is where we can bring in quality level users to sign off on what's been added or what's been changed. In the next field, the related documents field, that's where I'm going to reference the design review record that initiates the design review and formally documents the design review process. If you need to capture normal level users' signatures on this design review, they should be captured on the design review record. This approvers field is only available for quality level users. So if there are additional normal level users that need to sign off on these items, they can be captured on the related document that will be referenced here. So again, in this case, I'm going to reference the design review record. You may also reference things like your design and development plan, risk management plan, verification validation plan, whatever documentation you have that supports what's getting approved here can be referenced in that field. Okay, now my review is underway. The review was initiated on the dashboard. Now that it's underway, it's available on the reviews tab. Here we have an in progress section and a completed section. So once this is completed, it will move down to the completed section. So this is the review form while it's underway. We have all of the design elements listed that are being routed for approval collectively. We can see who the approver is, and we can see the linked documentation supporting what's getting approved here. Again, I can click on any row to generate this preview. And here we can see the review history of some of these. So these are all being collected under DCC3, and this one's in progress. Although you do not see details of what has changed, simply click on the ID of the DCC, and that will bring you to the form where those change details will be documented. Now back on my dashboard, all of my new items have been removed from that first section. They're now listed under changes awaiting approval. The status has changed to in review. So earlier we saw that the design control status was new, and now the status is in review. Once this has been approved, the status here will change to approved. After that, there are two other potential statuses, and we can see one here that is changed, and the other potential status is deleted. If you delete an approved requirement or risk, that deletion will need to be approved. If you delete an object that hasn't been approved, it will be immediately purged. Okay, there's a question there. Ori reviews, are there controls in place that will not let a user move to the next stage until the required review is completed? Unfortunately, the system doesn't have any sort of forcing function like that. That would need to be proceduralized and documented appropriately. I hope that helps. So just hit play again. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to approve this. I'm going to provide my electronic signature, and that will complete the review. Oh, before I do that, I'm just pulling up another example of a design review record. This one is a little bit more fleshed out, and I'll scroll through that now as well. So this has a lot more potentially familiar data. And now again, if there were corrections or changes that resulted from this design review, those changes or corrections can be documented on this design review record, but then the risk assessment can be performed on the change control here as well. Or not the risk assessment, the impact assessment. Okay, I'm ready to approve. I'm going to give it a brief note, and I'm going to input my signature details. Okay, now we have completed our first review in Qualio. Now that this has been completed, this design review record can be routed for approval. And if needs be, this DCC can be referenced on that design review record as well. Now, when you complete a review, you will generate a series of design control documents, and these will feed the deliverables that will go into your design and development plan, your DHF, your DMR, your technical file, and we can see them filed here now. So we will provide you with a requirements trace matrix, a risk analysis matrix, a collection of specifications, and the collated validation and verification test cases and test evidence. So these files are automatically generated upon completion of these reviews, and the population of these files is cumulative. So every review you go through will build on the previous. So in the case of this design review, or in the case of this review, we've just approved a user need, a couple of user specifications or design inputs, and one risk. So if this was the very first review, I would expect my trace matrix to include one level 1 requirement and 3 level 2 requirements. And in the risk analysis, there would only be one risk. If on the second DCC, then we include more risks and more user needs, then that data will populate the second trace matrix and second risk matrix. So effectively, each DCC is a snapshot in time of what has been approved in terms of your product's design elements. Okay, that's the review completed. Now that we've completed our review, we can go back to our documentation and start updating that documentation with links or references to the deliverables that we have generated. So in this design history file index, for design development plan, I've referenced the plan that we saw earlier. For product requirements, I've referenced the DCC itself, where those requirement specs and design specs live, shall we say. Things like your marketing assessment or patent review, they might be produced externally. So you might have like a PDF or indeed maybe like a link to an article, whatever it might be. They can be hosted or stored on a Qualio document. In this case, it's a simple document. I've just called a quality record with the ID QR or prefix QR. And those external records can be attached, and then that Qualio document can be linked here. For the preliminary risk analysis, I've referenced the DCC, and for your risk management plan, we reference an actual Qualio document. And then in terms of stakeholders, an example we've provided here is using an employee file. So this is where you'll document all of their credentials and potentially the job description. And this is a Qualio document that we're referencing here. And then finally, the design review record for the phase one, we referenced that Qualio document. So that's phase one completed. We've linked all of the deliverables and we can move on. We can go back to our design and development plan and do the same thing. We can reference all of the deliverables that we've generated, whether that is an object in design controls or whether that's a Qualio document, or indeed the supplier section itself. We can reference your approved suppliers list directly. Okay, so now we're going to move on to phase two, and some of the actions and artifacts to be completed include like your DMR, your trace matrix. It's in phase two that you'll begin the qualification of your suppliers. So you might not have an approved suppliers list at the end of phase one, but you'll have that at the end of phase two, and you can reference that later. Some other actions and artifacts include your risk analysis, design review, and the drafting of your VMV protocols. And that's what we're going to take a look at now. This will actually be done in Jira. Sorry, I didn't update that. And then change control as well. Okay, so now that we have inputted our requirements, assessed them for risk and approved them, what I'm going to do now is a sort of gap analysis. In this Open Issues tab, this allows you to identify gaps between your product's design elements. And by default, you will display all design elements with potential gaps, and we can see a number of items getting called out here. There are objects that have been determined to be orphaned, objects with fields for links, but no links have been inputted. And then there are a number of objects or a number of requirements that have been flagged as untested. Now with this drop-down menu, you can use this to filter and focus on a particular type of design elements. So depending on what phase you're going through, maybe you want to focus on user needs or design inputs or user stories, whatever they are. So here we're seeing that preview again. We've seen this notification or this pop-up a couple of times now. I haven't really spoken about it yet. This information is coming from this Open Issues tab. So this user need, this level 1 requirement, it's been identified as untested. No test has been tied to this user need. So we can infer from that that no validation has been tied to it, not yet at least. We can focus on the user stories. And now what we're going to do, we're going to go into Jira and we're going to begin adding tests to those requirements. So now what we're going to do, we're going to create more issues in that Jira project. The type of issue we're going to use is test case. Again, this approach isn't set in stone. There are different ways that we can approach this. You could have a verification specific issue. You can have a validation specific issue. That's if you're using Jira. If you're using any of the add-ons like X-Ray or Test Rails, instead of creating an issue in Jira, the work will be done in those systems and we can pull the data from those systems, but we'll continue with Jira for now. So I'll select the test case and I'll put in my verification test for the level 2 requirements that we created earlier. And then I'm going to move on and link this test case to the requirement that we created earlier. So again, we're going to use that relates to option. And then in the issue field, we're going to relate to that level 2 requirement we created earlier. So I've added a test case for one. I'm going to add another test case for another. And again, I'm going to use the relates to option in Jira to set up the traceability and link back to that earlier design input. And now we're going to go back to Qualio just to see what of that data has been pulled across. So back onto my dashboard, I'll refresh. So again, I'm using the design control status to arrange in a particular order. This way I've pulled up all of the new requirements and straight away I can see the test case that we've just created. We can see what requirement it relates to. So I'm just waiting on the rest or the other test case to come through. So back on the requirements tab, we can expand the requirements that we have just created. And when we expand the level 2 requirement, that's when we'll find the test case that we have just added. So the second one is just taking a moment to come through from Jira. Again, that sync time is 5 minutes. So as you're working in Jira, if you're potentially someone who might be in both places, as you're working in Jira, once the work in Jira is done, when you go back to Qualio, everything will be waiting for you. There we go. Now we can see it. So that test case was added in Jira, and then that data was pulled across to Qualio. So as well, because we've added or associated a test case with this user story, the one we added earlier, and we approved it, it's now being flagged as changed because we've updated or amended the attributes to this requirement. I'm just looking at the clock there, folks. I know I've gone over a little bit. I just have a couple more slides to get through, and then I'll let you all go. So if you need to jump, feel free to jump. But if you can hang on, I've just got a couple of more slides to get through. Okay, so that's phase 2 completed. I'm going to move on to phase 3, but before I do that, I see a question there about the risk matrix and if it can have multiple risks during the phase review. You can add as many risks as you require. So regardless of whether you are in the development process or maybe you're post-market and you are documenting some changes and you're assessing them for risk, you can bring in as many risks as you require. On that review, we saw a number of design inputs, 1 user need and 1 risk. There's no limitation to the number of risks, user needs, or design inputs, or indeed any type of design element. It's just for the purpose of this demonstration, we just had 1 risk to exemplify the workflow. Okay, so that's our phase 2 complete. We're going to move on to phase 3 in a moment. Before we do that, what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our design and development plan. That's our checklist. We're going to go through this to make sure that we have done everything we need to do, and we'll update these the document number field with references to deliverables that we've produced in this phase. And now we'll move on to verification and validation. Some actions and artifacts here. Update your trace matrix. That will be automatically generated by Qualio with every review you complete. Risk analysis. Every risk you assess and then approve will generate a new risk matrix in Qualio then as well. What we're going to look at here today is inputting the results of the tests in Jira. It's a very straightforward process. We're just inputting a value on one particular field, and then some other examples of what you might do in this stage are change control. So now we're going to go back to Jira. We're going to add the test results for the tests that we created in the previous phase. So on the test case issue in Jira, we have a custom field label and labeled it result, and we keyed in some options to provide as responses. So let me just pause there. So this is a custom field. We've labeled it result, and then the options here are passed, failed, or skipped. So your input here will be pulled into Qualio as well. So that's our verification and validation results completed. Now we've completed phase 3, we're going to move on to phase 4. At this point, we can go back, we can update our design and development plan, again, with links to deliverables that we've produced during this phase. And then we'll move on to design transfer and release. At this point, most, if not all, the work will be done in Qualio documents. The work on the design control side has been completed. This is when you're going to finalize your device master record, your technical file, your risk analysis, risk management report, and regulatory clearance. All of that work will be done in the Qualio documents side. As well, design transfer checklist, final design review, change control, and as well your design history file. My last video for you today, folks, is just an example of a design history file, a full screen example. Before I get on to that, just come back to your design and development plan. We've completed phase 4, so we're going to go back to this document. We'll input the references or the links in the relevant field, and they will point to the deliverables that we've produced through this phase. And then now I'll show you the design history file example that we have available. So this is another Qualio document. And again, we are taking advantage of the linking option available in Qualio. From the documents, or with the documents, you have an option for what we call a smart link. And a smart link always leads to the latest version of a document. Outside of Qualio documents, if you're linking to design controls or suppliers, you're linking direct to that object itself, or to that specific object. So for phase one, again, we've gone back in and we've updated this table with links to the different deliverables. For the design and development plan, we're linking that document. For the product requirements, we're linking that review form where those requirements are housed or attached. Market assessment, patent review, we kind of went through earlier. So your final qualification of suppliers or your supplier qualification will begin in phase two. So here we've linked the suppliers section in Qualio. Risk management plan, that's the smart link to the document. And then as we go through each phase, we'll come in and we'll update each cell with a link to that deliverable. Okay, so that's the completed design history file. That format will be the same for your DMR or your technical file. Really, it's a simple document template format. And in each section, we use a table to define what the deliverables are, and then we'll reference or link out to those deliverables themselves. So again, you can follow this format for your DMR and your technical file as well. So that brings me to the end, folks. I just want to wrap up by going over the challenges that we hope to help you guys solve. The first one is disparate systems that do not link to a single source of truth, and the fact that all these different teams that are working together, while they're working together, they're working in different systems, and that results in a siloing effect that can hinder speed and collaboration. As well, end-to-end traceability is burdensome. Tracing all of those inputs produced in different systems can be quite the task, and indeed so can creating those final output artifacts. So with this new system that we've released, we hope that you will find it useful in solving these challenges. So that brings me to the end. I hope I've managed to answer everyone's question. There's a couple there, let me see. So there's a question there, should you always be able to see design controls in the top menu of the Qualio interface? I don't see this. The answer is simply, unfortunately not. The feature is by default disabled for new users. If you would like access for your account, simply use the in-app chat that's available when you're logged into Qualio, put the request to the support team, and then we'll take it from there. That person's still here. Yeah. Okay, I appreciate everyone hanging on. I know I went over today. If there's any other questions, feel free to shout out. Oh, I see someone has their hand up. Hi, was there a question you wanted to ask while we're here together?
Yes, hi. And we currently have a risk analysis document, and it's for it's a cumulative risk analysis that spreads over several different versions of the software. My question is, do those need to be inputted into Qualio, or would we just do the risk analysis when we make changes?
Great question. My first question would be, where are you guys with, or in terms of your product's development? Like, are you pre-market? Are you post-market?
We're post-market, but we're, making upgrades once or twice a year. We're going to new versions on a routine basis.
Got it. Okay, so to get full value from the functionality available here today, it would require almost, I suppose, a sort of backpedaling in that we would need to kind of divide and conquer. We would need to take the data and then migrate it into design controls.
Okay.
There would be a bit of work required there. But if there are regular changes planned for your device, it's definitely worth considering making or completing that migration because it will, once that migration is completed, it will streamline the change management process.
Great. Okay.
And it will generate automatically then a new trace matrix. So there will be a change potentially in format, and definitely a change in process. But to get the full benefit for yourselves, there would be a sort of data migration required.
Okay. Would that be the same? Would that be the same situation with like a requirement specification, a user requirement specification?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay. So pretty much anything that we have in a Word document right now that we control, hard copies of, would need to migrate that initially.
Yes.
Okay.
Now with the requirements, are you guys using Jira or DevOps?
Jira.
You're using Jira. Okay. So yes. like if we set you guys up today, every piece of requirements data in that Jira project, we would pull across immediately. So from the requirements perspective, there is much less of a migration workload required. It is important to note that we will pull across everything though in that project. One thing I didn't discuss today, so let's say you have multiple software products. With that, you may have multiple Jira projects and you may have one architecture project, and the architecture requirements will be the same for every one of your software products. So with that in mind, we can set you up in a way that you have multiple products in Qualio, but the requirements that feed those products in Qualio come from multiple Jira projects. So if you have an architecture project, that can feed into every product, but then for every other requirement, they may come from individual Jira projects. So there are different ways that we can get you set up. But if anything, whatever is already in Jira, once we set that integration up within 5 minutes, all of the data will be pulled across from the specified project or projects.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
No problem. From that point of view, there's one thing that we didn't discuss, and that was change control for post-market changes in terms of like generating change requests and change orders and handing down the tasks to complete that. That work would be done in events, but what I can do, I can follow up with you directly with an example template to use in events, and then if you have any follow-up questions, I can work with you directly to get that set up in your account.
Great, thank you.
No problem. If that's all the questions, we can leave it there for today. I think that's everything for now. Well, thank you very much for your questions, folks, and for participating today. I'll probably follow early next week with certificates of participation, if that's okay.
Definitely.
Super. Well, thank you very much for joining today, folks. I'll let you all go about the rest of your day, and I'll be in touch with some of you, those of you that requested templates over the next few days.
Great. Thank you.
Have a good day, folks.